Hello everyone and welcome back to our reading of Sasquatch, True Life Encounters with Legendary Ape Men. At least my copy says Sasquatch, and today is the conclusion. Let's get started. Throughout this book, I have tried to present the evidence for the existence of man-like apes around the world in as impartial a manner as possible. Unsurprisingly, the evidence has been interpreted in different ways by skeptics and believers, but I have sought to give both sides an equal hearing. None of the creatures that I have featured has been accepted by the wider scientific community, though some individual scientists have stated their conviction that one or more of these beasts is real. Others have stated their willingness to look at the evidence, which is a start. Perhaps the most important hindrance to proving that any cryptid exists is the quality of the evidence. Quantity is not a problem, because there have been quite literally thousands of reports of cryptid apes from around the world. It is the credibility of those reports that is in question. Footprints can be faked, films can be hoaxed, and nests can be built by human hands. Not only can these things happen, but we know that they have taken place. Frauds and hoaxes of many different types have been exposed over the years. This is all that a skeptic needs to be able to cast doubt on all of the evidence. The most controversial, and at the same time the most common type of evidence, is sightings of cryptid animals by humans. For some of the cryptids, such as the llamas or the Mericoxi, eyewitness accounts are pretty much the only evidence available. Again, frauds and hoaxes are not only possible, but are known to have occurred. But even when, in all honesty, a person reports having seen a cryptid, it does not necessarily mean that they have seen an unknown animal. People can easily be mistaken in what they see, especially if lighting conditions are poor and the creature is seen only fleetingly. There comes a time, however, when the author of a book such as this has to nail his colours to the mast, give his opinions of the evidence, and suggest what should be done about it. It does no good simply to report the evidence, but then avoid making any firm judgments on the subject. So here, for what it is worth, is what I think. I believe that there is a Sasquatch living in the forested mountains of northwestern North America, and I believe that it corresponds to the figure seen in the Patterson movie. The evidence for its existence falls short of proof, but the balance of probabilities would suggest that there is such a creature. I think that it is probably confined to that area of the continent, though it was probably distributed much more widely until the arrival of the Europeans with their more intensive farming techniques. I do not think that the evidence supports the survival of the Sasquatch outside the western forests, nor do I believe that the skunk ape is a real living animal. The evidence for its existence is weak and largely circumstantial. I do not, however, rule it out completely, and would be pleased to be proved wrong should more evidence turn up. Moving on to South America, the reports of the Mericoxi would seem to be descriptions of a type of human that is quite distinct from ourselves. We know that human evolution has produced many side branches, dead ends and detours. There is nothing intrinsically impossible about a distinct subspecies or species of humans surviving to the present day. The evidence for it is, however, slim. Such evidence as there is relates back to a time when the vast forests of South America were utterly unexplored. These days, what with logging and forest clearance, there are few areas that are unknown. There is today no such tribe as the Mericoxi, and all reports of primitive humans ceased some 30 years ago. The evidence would indicate that there are no tribes of early humans in South America, and that most of the reports and stories could be dismissed as folk tales and myth. But then there is the report made by Colonel Percy Fawcett, Fawcett was very definite about what he had seen and experienced. He was a serious explorer, who has never been found to have lied or to have misreported what he discovered, though he admittedly had some rather odd theories to account for it all. I think we must accept that Fawcett really did meet a tribe of hairy humans of rather primitive aspect. But we must also accept that whatever these humans were, they are now extinct. As for the Mono Grande, or whatever name is given to the giant monkey or small ape of northern South America, the evidence is quite beyond dispute. The existence of this creature is, I believe, quite beyond dispute because there is a primate living in the dense forests that grows to be about 5 feet tall. Personally, I would credit Deloy with accurately reporting the lack of a tail. However, I don't think that this necessarily makes the creature an ape. It may be a form of monkey that has evolved to be very large, which has adapted to a life on the ground. Such a creature may very well evolve in such a way that it loses its tail. So far as I can see, the problem with this creature is not whether or not it exists, but what it is. Hopefully, a specimen will be brought in one day that will clarify the issue. The primitive humans of Asia, the Yeren, the Almas, and others are a different proposition. Eyewitness reports are the only source of evidence, and the regions in which they are said to live are remote and difficult to access. There are no footprint casts, no photographs, and no hair samples, or at least none that have survived the recurrent political upheavals in those areas. However, the eyewitness evidence that has been collected is strong and consistent. Traditional folklore reports from local tribesmen and sightings by Western observers all point towards some form of primitive human living in the forested mountains. The Neanderthal has been put forward as one solution to the mystery, but early human evolution in Asia is poorly understood, so there might be some other subspecies to explain the reports. If the various eyewitness accounts can be trusted, then there can be no doubt that the Caucasus and the Tian Shan and Pamir mountain ranges do support small populations of a primitive type of human. However, all reports also agree that the creatures are being seen less often and across smaller territories. If they do exist, they are dying out. Personally, I found the evidence strong but not convincing. Given the difficulty and the high cost of reaching these regions, it is unlikely that much new evidence is going to be found at any time soon. The Yeti is a real puzzle. Taken at face value, the evidence produced for its existence is meager indeed. Footprints have been found, but the evidence they provide is inconclusive. Also, the sightings by Europeans are so rare as to be meaningless, and the few supposed remains have turned out to be from other animals. However, the habits ascribed to the beast and the overall description of it could easily fit a bear. In fact, common sense would indicate that the Yeti is nothing more than a bear. Seen in difficult light and by a person thinking about the Yeti, a bear could easily be taken for something else. And yet, the people who inhabit the Himalayas are absolutely convinced that the Yeti is a real animal, and they consistently describe it as being a large ape. This in a place where, so far as is known, apes have not lived for hundreds of thousands of years. How would farmers and herdsmen living in remote mountain valleys come up with a description of an ape if the nearest apes lived thousands of miles away across half a continent of mountains, forests, and hostile kingdoms? It would be much easier to believe that they described an ape-like creature because they had seen one. In the final analysis, I am unconvinced by the Yeti, but I do not rule it out completely. I think that there may be an ape up in the mountain forests, but I consider it rather unlikely. The orang pendek fits into a similar category to the Yeti. The evidence is thin but curiously persuasive, because the local people are quite clearly convinced that it is a real animal that shares their forests with them. It is treated by them as a flesh and blood animal, not some sort of supernatural being. Stories from these farmers and hunters are many, and they consistently describe a diminutive, human-like creature that is neither ape nor monkey. Reports by outsiders are much rarer, and one of those was almost certainly a sighting of an unusually large gibbon. Hard evidence is very scarce and inconclusive. On the face of it, the evidence for the orang pendek is thin to the point of vanishing, and yet the locals seem to be quite definite on the subject. Moreover, the pattern of the reports is not only credible but indicative of a real creature. In the early 20th century, the orang pendek was reported from a wide range that ran across southern Sumatra, and it was always seen in remote and effectively unexplored areas of upland forest. Today, the creature is still reported from remote forested hills, but since the area that remains unfrequented by outsiders has shrunk greatly, so has the area from which reports are made. This is exactly what would be expected of sightings of a shy creature that prefers to avoid humans. I would like to believe that the orang pendek does exist, but I cannot in all honesty rate the chances of this being the case at much over 50%. Space to hide. The case for the Yowie is even thinner. Aboriginal beliefs from pre-settlement times were recorded only sporadically by Europeans. In some cases, they have clearly been influenced by the person writing them down. Reports from the 19th and early 20th century could easily be accounted for by sightings of Aborigines, particularly of those engaged on ritual journeys and tasks of various kinds. Aborigines can be tall and they can be hairy. More recent accounts are often just as vague as the older ones, at least since the 1960s, have been given by people who are familiar with the story of a hairy fella living in the bush. There is a lot of evidence, but nearly all of it is based on eyewitness testimony, not on footprints, hair samples, or other hard data. Nor is the theory behind the Yowie very convincing. The continent of Australia was isolated for millions of years. Apart from the ancestors of native marsupials and reptiles, the only creatures that have arrived from outside since the isolation have been those that could fly or travel on a boat. There is no evidence that any very early forms of humans ever built boats capable of sea crossing. It is hardly unlikely, therefore, that any ape or lower form of human made it to Australia before the ancestors of the Aborigines. I don't really think that the Yowie can be the unknown cryptid that its supporters suggest. The evidence for a species of upright walking hairy ape simply does not stack up. That said, Australia is a vast country, and there is plenty of space for things to hide. If anyone is in any doubt that it is possible for a large creature to hide in unfrequented areas without being found by humans, they should look at the case of the Yahi, a First Nation of North America that lived in the Sierra Nevadas of California. The 1,400 or so Yahi lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle and were but one of several tribes of the larger Yana group of the region. However, in 1848, they had the great misfortune to have gold found on their territory. White gold miners flooded into the area, and violent clashes with the Yahi led to a bloodbath. The fighting culminated in the Three Knolls massacre of 1865, when a large group of miners surrounded the last Yahi village and launched a dawn attack. Men, women, and children were all killed, and by the end of the day the miners were convinced that they had wiped out the entire Yahi people. However, a group of about 30 Yahi people had not been in the camp at the time. They found the bodies of their tribesmen and held a meeting to discuss what to do. They decided to take to the forests, avoid all white men, and seek to survive until the gold had run out and the miners had gone. At Oroville on August 29, 1911, the Yahi re-emerged into history, when the last survivor was caught, apparently trying to filch food. For the previous 46 years, the tribe had managed to survive, though with ever-dwindling numbers in the Sierra Nevada, without once attracting the attention of the thousands of Americans who lived in the area. Clearly, it is possible to evade humans for a long time, even in fairly well-known and well-traveled regions. Over the years, a vast amount of evidence has been collected about the Sasquatch, the orang pendek, the almas, and other cryptid apes, and yet none of them has yet been accepted as a real animal by the scientific establishment. I have outlined some of the problems, the types of evidence produced, the funding system for scientific research, and the career paths of scientists. In my view, none of these cryptids will be accepted as a genuine creature until somebody hauls a body out of the wilderness. Understandably, given that these creatures seem to be becoming rarer, many researchers do not want to do that. They continue to bombard scientists with eyewitness reports, footprint casts, and photographs, but get nowhere. Different path. Some researchers are beginning to think that a different path should be taken, rather than try to convince the scientists. It has been suggested that efforts should be made to convince the politicians. After all, politicians control the purse strings of a nation. If they are convinced that a creature exists, they are able to fund scientific research and massive hunts, and they have the authority to deploy all sorts of high-tech equipment. The United States military operates drone aircraft carrying infrared equipment designed to find and identify a single human terrorist in the vast wilds of Afghanistan. Deploying such equipment is fiendishly expensive, but if one such drone were sent up over the Bluff Creek area, it surely would not take long to establish the existence or otherwise of Sasquatch. It has been suggested that some sort of official inquiry would be the best start. The hope is that a group of politicians could be persuaded to launch an investigation. Ideally, such an investigation would take an unbiased look at the existing evidence and then reach a decision on the balance of probabilities. Such an inquiry would no doubt gain the support and cooperation of the researchers and eyewitnesses. If that inquiry came to the conclusion that the evidence indicated that there was a real creature behind the reports, then that might be enough to unlock the government coffers to fund some proper large-scale research that might actually prove that such creatures exist. Save the Sasquatch. The best chances of success is offered by a study of the Sasquatch in the western United States and Canada. There are various reasons for this. Both the United States and Canada are relatively wealthy nations. The supposed home of the Sasquatch is not as remote as, say, the Tian Shan Mountains, and the evidence for the Sasquatch is relatively strong. If the evidence relating to the Sasquatch is to be taken at anything like face value, then its range and numbers have declined dramatically in the past 200 years, and things are getting worse. Rene Dahinden has commented that when he began looking for the Sasquatch almost 50 years ago, footprints and other signs were found with great regularity in areas even fairly close to human habitation. Now he has to push higher and higher in the mountains or deeper into unfrequented forests to find less evidence than before. If Sasquatch is not proved to exist soon, it might be too late. It would be a great crime if science did not accept the reality of the Sasquatch until after it was extinct. And thus concludes our reading. This has been a very interesting journey, and although I do have some other books on the subject of the cryptozoological and the paranormal, I am thinking of taking a dive into the classics. I'm BryanCroiDragon. Thanks for watching.